We have a busy afternoon ahead of us, and so I'm going to vote that we move forward. Is that all right with everybody? Can you hear me okay? I generally am told I'm too loud, so that's all right. Well, thank you for being here. Welcome to the 2024 Morgan Forum. We have a long afternoon ahead of us, so I appreciate you being here from the very beginning, and I hope you will stay through the very end. We're certainly excited about this. A ton of work has gone into make it happen, and we're very excited about the film screening and the panel discussion we'll have later. So I hope you are looking forward to that. So my name is Bo Adams. I've met many of you, but not all of you. I have the great privilege of serving as director of Pitt's Theology Library, along with wonderful colleagues like Dee Roberts that you see here. I just want to remind everybody, as I often do, why we're here, and that is for the J. Michael Morgan English Bible and Psalmody collection, which is largely the work of our great friend Michael Morgan. Let me just, who of you knew Michael here? Yeah. So Michael was a dear friend to so many of us, and it's hard to say what, you can't finish the sentence, Michael was a, right? Was he a collector? Was he a musician? Was he a teacher? He was all of these things. Little known fact, he was a librarian actually first, so that's the most important thing. But the reason we do the Morgan Forum is to continue what Michael's vision was, at least as he expressed it to me and as I understand it. That is that Michael did not simply think building a collection was the end game, right? This is Michael's library. My friend and colleague Guy, who is here, took this very picture. I think it's an iPhone picture. Is that right, Guy? Yeah. It's an amazing collection, and Michael spent most of his life building it. And he could tell you incredible stories about how he acquired some of these things, as he would say, on a church organist salary. But I don't believe that was the end game for him at all, because as we all know who knew him, he would throw a bunch of these Bibles in the back of a Toyota Highlander and drive all over the Southeast to churches and schools, because he wanted people to learn, experience, and to think about what it meant to collect so many Bibles. And so for us here at Pitt's Theology Library, the goal and the mission is always to ask the question, why do we do this? That is, why studying the history of the English Bible is valuable, not as a historical enterprise, but to help us reflect on contemporary situations. That is, if we are going to form communities around this text, understanding something about the history of the text helps us understand those communities better. This, as I mentioned, is the second year we've done this. We started it last year, and I hope you'll recognize that the content from last year is online. All of the stuff we're doing today will also be recorded and is online. But we want this to be an annual event where people get, through a different lens or a different window, an opportunity to engage the scriptures and to understand what these texts mean for communities, good or bad, what they have mean for individuals and communities. I want to thank those who made this event happen. I mentioned Dee earlier. The entire Pitt staff has put this together. Handler Events, Ruth Casali, and her team have done an amazing work getting us organized, catered, and all kinds of things. The IT team, you see my colleague Matt sitting in the back, but Matt and his colleague Shamala John have helped us get online and live stream this event. Candler's Advancement and Alumni Engagement team has been instrumental in kind of making this event happen and committing or pairing it with the Committee of 100. And then, of course, our Morgan Fellows, who you will hear from in a little bit. One of the great joys of this collection is that we get to engage students from both Candler School of Theology as well as Columbia Theological Seminary to learn a little bit more about our collection, to tell us the stuff we have, and we learn so much from the fellows, and we will certainly do so today. I want to mention quickly what you're up against today. The schedule is brutal, so it is a marathon, certainly not a sprint. In the materials that you received when you check in, you got one of these, yes? You all have seen it. If for some reason you like to be a digital person, you can scan the QR code and get it digitally. But I want you, if you can, to flip to the schedule just so I can run down for you what we're going to do. Here we are in that second block of gray that says welcome and updates on the Morgan collection. That's me. And then after this, immediately here, we will have our Morgan Fellows do their presentations. At 2:45, or roughly, we will retire up into the atrium, which is 2 flights up or 1 elevator ride up, where we'll have coffee and refreshments, but you'll also have an opportunity to meet with our fellows, to see the item that they're particularly talking about, as well as look at a mini pop-up exhibition that we have curated in our gallery, some of which I will talk about in just a second. Then what I suspect is the star of the show will be the screening of the 1946 film, which will be at 3:30, and immediately following that will be our panel discussion about the film, and then we will have a reception back in the atrium at the end of that. So as you see, it's a long afternoon, but I'm certainly glad that you are here with us. Any questions about what we're up to today before we get moving? Easy enough. Excellent. Okay. I also want to highlight in your packet, you have other information about future Pitts events. We wouldn't waste the opportunity of an audience to tell you about other things that we're doing. This is our Kessler Reformation Day event that's happening at the end of October. If you like what you get today, just move back a couple of centuries, and that's where you'll be with the Reformation collection. We'll talk about that at the end of October. We also have a series of virtual conversations focused around politics. It's political season. I don't know if you've heard. I got texts from several candidates earlier today. We're going to be engaging the question of what does it mean to be a citizen American, informed by some of the classic texts of the Reformation. That will all happen post-election, and those are all virtual events that are online. I also want to mention that we have some legacy collection materials available from prior Morgan engagement events, including an exhibition that we curated last fall that you can actually tour virtually and learn a little bit about the collection through that. But what I really want to talk about now for the next few minutes is what's going on with the Morgan collection. Many of you are important stakeholders in this collection, and so I think it's important that you get a sense of what are we doing with this amazing gift that Michael gave us. In December 22, we started the process of moving and documenting and cataloging and rehousing and storing this remarkable collection. So for the past 20 months, we've been quite busy. Original cataloging records have to be created for many of these items. Provenance and condition research on individual items is always ongoing. And this is the combination effort of the Pitts staff, notably my colleagues Armin Tidletsky and Brenna Michael, who are our catalogers, as well as a vast army of student workers, particularly Silas Vermilia and Kate Underwood, who have been deeply involved in the documenting of the Morgan collection. And I'm happy to report that cataloging records of well over half of the collection have already been created. This means the items are discoverable, and you can learn a little bit more about the items through the online catalog. Today, though, we're going to focus about when translation really matters. Because as I mentioned before, not only is Michael's work about the past, but it is about the present. And in light of that, I want to highlight 4 priorities that we have going on in the Morgan collection for the current year. The first is very consistent with what Michael sought to do, is to create broad coverage of the history of the English Bible. Michael used to always talk about his goal was to collect every English translation of the Bible that had ever been created. That's a ridiculous thing to even try to do, but I would suggest Michael got as close as pretty much anybody possibly could. And so we are very committed to continuing to acquire materials and to broaden the collection. Today's film that you'll see covers the history of the translation of one particular verse, 1 Corinthians 6:9. And on the display in the gallery is a remarkable array that shows the diversity of translations of that text, from all the way in the early 16th century through contemporary translations today, Greek, Latin, English, all kinds of Bibles. And I would suggest that there's no other collection in North America that could actually explore this one particular verse and the history of its troubled past through all of these books. So a broad collection is really important, particularly when taking on important works like this. What's also wonderful about the Morgan collection is that it fits very nicely with what was the existing Pitts collections. And so also in the gallery, we have one example of that where we've placed Michael's beautiful 1549 Book of Common Prayer alongside the previous Pitts copy, the 1662 updated edition of the Book of the Common Prayer. So just one example of how these two collections come well together. We also have continued in this vein to collect historic Bibles that were not part of the Morgan collection. So this is, and apologies for my digitization, I'm not a digital specialist, but here we are. This is a recent acquisition that we made. This is the Matthew Carey 1801 Bible. Carey was an Irish Catholic American printer whose Philadelphia operation was the first mass producer of Bibles in America. And this is the 1801 King James Bible that he created and launched him as the dominant American Bible printer of the early 19th century. Carey, in fact, produced 60 editions of the Bible between 1801 and 1824. And so this is just one example of a type of printer and a type of Bible that we are continuing to collect to supplement the work that Michael did. So the first priority here is to continue broad coverage of the history of the English Bible. Second is we are deeply engaged in studying the history of the process and personalities of translation. Now, the film that you're going to see later highlights this explicitly, right? That is, who were the translators of the 1946 Revised Standard Version? What was their goal? Who were they trying or what were they trying to do? And the Morgan collection documents this incredibly well, particularly through editions that include prefaces or descriptions of what the translators were trying to do that don't appear in later translations. I just gave a talk earlier to a group about the preface to the King James that appears in the 1611 original, but very quickly falls out. That is, no longer appears in later editions of the King James. And I would argue that's a real problem, because this particular preface to the Bible really sets the stage for how the translators understood their work and how the scriptures should be read. I'll skip through those. But one of the other things that we've done in the gallery is to explore in a different translation setting how this process is changing. So as I said, the 1946 film is going to talk a little bit about kind of the shadowy, smoke-filled rooms that they suggest was happening with the 1946 translation. What we have on display in the gallery are actually notes from the translation committee that was creating the Common English Bible, which is perhaps a translation you're familiar with, was published in 2011. And we are privileged to hold the archives of the Old Testament editor of that. And what you can see here, and I encourage you to go see in the gallery, are actually the Word documents with track changes that show the conversations that were going on between the translators. And they're quite interesting. So you can see here they're translating the book of Isaiah, and they're debating whether they should use the word wine or beer. And you can see some back and forth and disagreement about that. But they also give us really interesting insight into what they were trying to do. So here they tell us that they're shooting for a 7th grade reading level. And as you look through their notes, they've highlighted in yellow everything that is beyond 7th grade, right? So words that might be pressing kind of their target audience. So again, this is new in translation. Committees being very explicit and very open and transparent about what they're trying to do and who they're trying to translate for. Here's another interesting note that talks about readers for chapter 1 through 23 are from a Presbyterian church in Florence, Alabama. So interestingly, they were workshopping or focus grouping the translation with church people and trying to get the feedback there. So again, this move to kind of broaden and make more transparent the process of translation. And this is something that's very important to us in the library, that is to use these Bibles to understand the politics behind some of the translations. A third priority for this year is learning more about items that were in Michael's collection. And this is, of course, the real work of the cataloger, not simply to document what edition or when this was printed, but rather to study the object itself and to learn a little bit more about its history and how it came to be. Now, Michael, like any good collector, was keenly interested in interesting provenance within his collection. But we've had a lot of opportunities to explore further and to uncover other previous owners or notations or what have you in the Morgan collection. We have 3 really interesting examples in the gallery, but I'll simply highlight one of them here. One of the real prizes of Michael's collection is the Isaac Leeser Bible. This here is the title page of the first edition printed in Philadelphia in 1853, which is the first American Jewish translation of the scriptures. What I didn't realize that Michael also has a number of really interesting later editions of the Leeser Bible, including this one, the 1865 London printing of that same Bible. That includes here the bookplate of Moses Dropsy, 1821 to 1905, who was a Philadelphia lawyer and president of Maimonides College and later of Gratz College, and who was actually a patron or supporter of the work that Leeser was doing. And through that work, he committed to furthering Jewish education in the United States and stipulated that the money left in his will, that is, in Dropsy's will, was to be used for the founding of Dropsy College, which is now the Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, which has become one of the premier centers of higher learning and Judaism in America now. And so what you see is a wonderful connection between Dropsy's support for Leeser, Leeser's creation of this Bible, and then it ending up in Michael's hands and then ending up in our collection. There's a picture of Dropsy there. So what the ongoing work of doing is not simply documenting what Michael had collected, but trying to learn a little bit more about where these books have been before and what we can learn about the people who owned them before Michael and before us. The fourth priority is using the Morgan collection to better understand the history of the book. Now, one of the benefits of collecting the same thing, that is English Bibles, is you can kind of fix the text and then start to look around the text and look at how different ways that the English Bible was presented in different formats and through different media. And so one thing that we have continued to do is to collect interesting examples of how the Bible is being presented I talked about earlier, when King Charles was coronated, they created the Coronation Bible, which you can see. But also sometimes we collect things that might be a little bit more controversial. So here you've probably seen the Lee Grinwood God Bless the USA combination of Bibles. This is Guy and I've talked about. This is something Michael would have never collected himself. But this suggests a little bit of the difference in Michael's focus and in our focus as an academic library, because you can imagine a couple hundred years from now, it's going to be quite interesting to see how politics had been enmeshed with the creation of the Bible like this. So again, we're interested in the Bible as object and the ways in which the biblical text is being presented. One particular example that I'll show in the gallery is the creation of the red letter editions, right? So when did Jesus' words start to be printed in red? This actually grew out of the Morgan Forum last year. Someone came up to me and said, hey, when did they start printing the English, the letters or the words of Jesus in red? And I had no idea, right? And so I kind of fumbled through an example, but I didn't know, right? So I immediately ran off and tried to learn myself. And of course, the best source for learning that was to read Michael's catalog, which told me exactly everything I needed to know. And it was this gentleman, Louis Klopsch, who was a German-American publisher who for many years ran the Christian Herald, an American evangelical publication, a weekly newspaper. And in 1899, he is the one who came up with the idea of printing Jesus' words in red, pulling off of the Luke 22:20 passage, this cup is the New Testament of my blood shed for you. And so he, as in his capacity as the editor of the Christian Herald, actually made this happen, and in 1899 published a New Testament where the letters were printed in red. And of course, Michael had one, and so there's one in the collection. Here is the title page where you see it says at the top, with all the words recorded therein as having been spoken by our Lord, printed in color. Now, I kind of went on a deep dive with this, which I won't bore you with, but I find this fascinating, the way in which the Christian Herald, the publication, promoted this thing. It was and they promoted it as a way to grow the subscription to the magazine, right? It was like, sign up for the magazine and we'll also send you a copy of this remarkable, no book like it has ever been produced, New Testament. And you can see they got desperate, right? They started extending the deadline so more and more people would get this Bible. So that was 1899. Klopsch had done the New Testament. In 1901, he expanded the project and produced a full Bible, including the Old Testament. So you say, what did he do with the Old Testament? Obviously not words of Jesus in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, words quoted by Jesus in the New Testament are likewise printed and read in the Old Testament. And he also introduced what he calls, I think I have a picture of it here. It's over there, you can't see it. He introduced what he called the scarlet thread. And so he put a star by any passage in the Old Testament that is, quote, accepted as having reference to our Lord, so that the scarlet thread leading to him as the promised Messiah may be followed step by step through the sacred volume from Genesis to Malachi. Now, in 1901, the Christian Herald also used this new Bible as promotion, right? So you can see here talking about the full red letter Bible. What I love over here is it actually says, in short, the best Bible ever issued from any press. I think some of our fine press folks might disagree with that point. What's even more interesting, so you can see this is June 1901. If you move back a few months in March, they're really trying to get rid of those New Testaments before the full Bible comes out. So you can see it's the final notice that you can get that New Testament. The point is, and I hope you'll go in the gallery and explore some of this, the biblical text is itself a book and plays a part in the history of the book. And so as a library, we're very interested in the ways in which the biblical text has changed its form over time. So these are our main priorities for the year in terms of what we're doing with documenting Michael's collection. And I want to highlight one new acquisition that I think fits very well with this. This is the Doves Press Bible. Anyone know what this is? Guy's shaking his head because I know what it is. So one of the particular interests of Michael was not simply in old books, but in different ways in which the book was produced. And the Doves Press Bible, produced in 1903, is a particular example of the arts and crafts movement and the kind of attempt to reclaim the fine methods of printing Bibles from the 15th and 16th century. In the 19th century, the printing world changed quite a bit. This is kind of post-industrial revolution. Things were being mechanized, and mass production was a big thing. And so a lot of folks in the kind of arts and crafts movement were quite upset with the way that these kind of stereotyped Bibles, they all looked the same, and they weren't very fancy, and they weren't very nice. In 1888, Emery Walker inspired William Morris to create Kelmscott Press, a very famous small printing press focused on typography, page design, really kind of the art of biblical creation. And these guys were inspired by printers from the incunable period, that is, printers from the 15th century, such as Nicholas Jensen and Jacobus Rabius, who were some of the well-known printers of 500 years before. And they created these fine letterpress Bibles, and many of which are continued to produce today, right? These kind of hand press folks that continue to produce these Bibles. And this year we have acquired a Doves Press Bible, which is quite remarkable. It's something that I know Michael was always very interested in, and we are very excited to have it. Now, I have to tell you, so this is the famous title page or the beginning of Genesis in the Doves Press Bible. These are the beautiful lint vellum bindings of the 5 volumes that comprise it. It's not here today, and it's UPS's fault. So it's quite a disappointment. Actually, I shouldn't say it's UPS's fault. It's Emory University's fault. If you know anything about Emory, they've been trying to centralize mail services, and it's been a whole mess. So I have to apologize unless a brown truck pulls up right there, which would be wonderful timing. We won't have the Doves Press Bible with us today, but we will be digitizing it, and we will have lots of promotion about that. So we're excited to talk a little bit about that moving forward. So I'm going to stop with updates here and make way for the more important presentation, which is my Morgan fellow colleagues. I do want to encourage your support of the Morgan Collection. Everything we do, from acquisitions to programming, is supported by donations. It is really important that we continue Michael's legacy through the financial support of many of you who have already supported the collection, and so I'm very grateful for that. You can also support us by simply participating in our events, reading our stuff, learning, and asking questions about the kind of work we're doing. But for now, I will pause and stop and invite my colleague Dee Roberts to come up and introduce our Morgan Fellows.